Hi, I'm Shenan. Last night my husband hurled my suitcase into the gravel and laughed, "You'll be back, once that junkyard swallows you whole." His family called my inheritance a curse, a heap of rust, a debt trap, a joke. None of them saw what I would unearth beneath the dirt and steel, not even me. Not until it was far too late, for them. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. This story starts where most folks quit. I didn't. I was stacking grocery ads on the kitchen counter when the call came in, the kind of tinny landline ring you can feel in your teeth. "Mrs. Gale?" The voice belonged to an attorney in Ashland City, an hour west of Nashville. "Your grandfather, Lewis Ridgway, named you sole beneficiary of his estate. You'll need to sign tomorrow." I had to sit. Granddad's estate, as far as I knew, was an aging beagle and a shed that smelled like diesel. Still, I whispered thanks, copied the address, and watched my hand tremble around the pen. Next afternoon, I steered my Corolla past soybean fields and roadside fireworks stands until the weeds parted to reveal a chain-link gate and the sun-bleached board that once read, "Lewis and Sons Salvage." Everything looked smaller than the childhood memory. Rows of rust-striped pickups, towered piles of mufflers, shards of windshield glass catching the light like cheap diamonds. Yet under the dust I sensed his order. Axle housings lined by size, carburetors inside milk crates, the busted vending machine he never managed to fix. A breeze carried the scent of hot iron and clay. I flashed on being 8 again, standing on a milk crate so I could sort bolts for him. He'd leaned close and murmured, "One day, even rust tells a story." Back then, I'd thought it was magic. Now it felt like warning. I drove straight home, heart loud in my ears, and found Haddon at the dining room table scrolling his phone. His mother, Eula, stirred iced tea with a silver spoon she insisted was family. I cleared my throat. "Granddad left me the salvage yard," I said, hoping my voice sounded grateful, not panicked. Haddon didn't look up. "He left you a curse, not a legacy." Eula laughed, crisp and bright. "Salvage? Looks like the Ridgways finally figured out where you belong." Their laughter spread to his sisters at the buffet like water across linoleum. I stayed upright, knuckles whitening around the chair back. "It isn't junk to me," I managed. Haddon tossed his phone down. "Honey, it's acreage full of tetanus. You're sentimental, sure, but sentiment doesn't keep lights on." I swallowed hard. Myro, that old shop hand, once said Granddad experimented with solar furnaces in one of the sheds. Not junk, I told myself. Potential. Dinner plates were still warm when the attorney called again. He apologized. County back taxes and environmental fees totaled $69,000. I thanked him, hung up, and turned straight into a storm of paperwork as Haddon slapped liens onto the table. "Congratulations," he announced, voice loud enough for the hallway. "You inherited a dumpster fire." We argued in hushed tones until midnight. Somewhere between short-term loan and refinance, he stopped pretending to help. "You're a liability and you always were," he said at dawn, eyes flat. "Pack what you want, be out before I get off work." No shouting, no gestures, just surgical rejection. I took 2 duffels, clothes, laptop, the wedding photo I still wasn't ready to tear in half, and drove back to the yard. On the cracked office desk, under a film of red dust, lay a brass Zippo engraved LR. I thumbed the lid. Sparks flared, then died. I pocketed it anyway. Night dragged in cicada song. I unrolled a sleeping bag on the office floor, the metal roof pinging as heat left the day. In the silence, I lifted the lighter, clicked once more, watched the tiny flame shiver. "Grandpa," I whispered, "what am I supposed to do with this place?" Wind answered through broken louvers, carrying diesel ghosts. I exhaled and snapped the lid shut. Darkness settled. Seconds later, a different light pulsed, pale, electric, cutting through the window blinds. A motion sensor, one I had never switched on. A single bulb over the shipping container pulsed like a heartbeat, casting hard angles across the scrap piles. I slipped the wrench from the desk drawer, toes curling against cold concrete, and eased through the office door. The motion sensor buzzed again, brighter. Beyond the gate, a figure shifted, tall, broad-shouldered, parka mottled in greens and browns. "Whoever you are," I called, pitching my voice low but steady, "this place is private property." Both his hands rose, palms out. "Ma'am, easy now. Name's Myron Briggs. Worked with your granddad for years. Light came on, thought I'd pay respects." His drawl carried the same backroads cadence granddad used to have. Streetlight glow reached his face. Creased cheeks, silver stubble, eyes the color of wet slate. A tool belt hung at his hip, more habit than threat. Still, I kept the wrench where he could see it. He nodded toward the sign. Hard seeing Lewis and Sons this quiet. Figured nobody left since he passed. I exhaled, tension easing an inch. "I'm Shannon." I didn't add Gale. Tonight, that name felt borrowed. Myron's gaze flicked over the yard. "He always said you had grit. Told everybody the youngest Ridgway could outwork any suit in Nashville." I almost laughed. I owned 3 discount blazers and 0 confidence. "I barely remember summers here." "Maybe so," he said, patting a canvas satchel, "but he planned for you anyway." From inside, he pulled a weather-cracked sheet of drafting paper, corners reinforced with tape. Dark grease pencil marked storage rows, arrows pointing to shaded bays. Scrawled across the bottom, "Inventory's more than it looks. Start Bay 4. Granddad's handwriting, tight loops and stubborn angles. My pulse kicked. Why show me? Because yesterday a man driving a Mercedes asked if this place was for sale, said he'd take care of the taxes. Sounded a lot like your husband in the picture on Glenn's desk. My fingers tightened around the blueprint. So Haddon had tried selling before the will was even read. Myron's news stung, but it also clarified the battlefield. A night wind rattled tin siding. Myron tipped his cap. "Sun'll be up in a few hours. Locks'll stick, but crowbar should do. Best see for yourself." He pointed toward an orange pry bar leaning against the container. He kept his solar furnace sketches in Bay 4, too. "Always tinkering, your granddad. Thought scrap could make electricity someday." With a curt nod, he walked back to a dusty pickup, headlights off as he rolled toward the county road. I waited until dawn bled pink through the clouds. Coffee would have helped, but adrenaline worked just as well. Crowbar in hand, I crossed the yard. Rust flaked beneath my boots. The padlock on Bay 4 surrendered after 3 hard twists and a curse muttered into my sleeve. The metal door shrieked open. Inside, sunlight streamed through a broken skylight, igniting motes of dust and the gleam of enamel signs stacked like museum pieces. Behind them rested intact engine blocks wrapped in oilcloth, chrome valve covers, crates labeled Shelby 289, Hemi Super B. My phone buzzed weakly. There was still enough signal to search. 1 carburetor, $2,700. A full Super B block? Auction sites hinted 5 figures. My knees went soft. Granddad hadn't left me junk. He'd left possibility. Haddon's words, dumpster fire, looped through my mind, replaced by Eula's snicker. My jaw clenched. "Worthless, huh? We'll see." At the back of the bay sat Granddad's green Craftsman toolbox. I lifted the lid. Socket sets slept in velvet grooves, every wrench polished. Taped beneath, a small white envelope. Inside lay a cashier's check for $5,000 and a note. "Seed money. You'll figure it out. Remember? Russ tells stories. So do you." Heat pricked behind my eyes. I closed the toolbox, slipped the envelope into my jacket, and stepped outside just as sunlight spilled full over the yard. Chrome and steel flashed like applause. I pocketed the blueprint, feeling its paper edges bite my palm, a reminder that strategy matters more than speed. There would be taxes to settle, titles to verify, sharks to fend off. I'd need allies, invoices, maybe a welding torch I didn't yet know how to use. But for the first morning since the will, hope outweighed grief. I looked at the check, then at the rows of forgotten metal turning gold under the Tennessee sunrise. I folded the cashier's check into my wallet and slid the blueprint under a stack of parts catalogs. Sunrise crept higher, softening the jagged silhouettes of fenders and axles, yet everything inside me vibrated like a socket gun. Selling bits and pieces would cover back taxes, sure, but Granddad hadn't saved those engine blocks to watch them scatter on auction sites. He'd banked on transformation, not liquidation. So I built a plan, 3 tight weeks, sketched in pencil across a battered clipboard. Day 1-3, photograph every high-value item, watermark, list online. Day 4-10, create spreadsheets, contact specialty forums, answer midnight inquiries from collectors who spoke in part numbers. Day 11-21, separate restore from cash out, and, if sleep allowed, pressure wash years of grime from the office siding. By mid-morning, Myron rolled through the gate, window down, thermos steaming. He handed it over without a word. Dark roast, no sugar, just like Granddad drank when the Tennessee heat still clung to dawn. From the passenger seat he produced 2 dog-eared notebooks. "Client logs," he said. "Names, phone numbers, which cars they still dream about." I thanked him, though I kept my real numbers to myself. Trust is easier in installments. 5 reluctant days later, the first bids closed. An SS 396 carburetor for $2,700, a vintage Pontiac tri-power intake for $4,500. I drove the packages to the Ashland City Post Office, paid insurance, saved receipts like scripture. Confidence puffed my shoulders each time the clerk stamped, "Fragile." Back at the yard, I dragged a twin mattress into the trailer office, taped garbage bags over the cracked window, and labeled 2 shelves "Restore candidates." Whenever fatigue pressed, a memory lifted me, Granddad's palm ruffling my hair. "Keep going, Squirt. Steel just needs patience." 8 days in, dust motes dancing through late sunlight, the gravel outside crackled under unfamiliar tires. I stepped onto the stoop and froze. A black Mercedes angled to a stop, paint mirroring the sagging gate I'd chained an hour earlier. The driver's door swung open. Haddon emerged in a golf club polo I used to fold for him, sleeves tight on biceps from some new gym routine. My pulse stumbled. I noticed another door open, passenger side, and a woman unfolded herself gracefully, heels clicking. Navy skirt suit, blonde hair in a strategic wave, leather portfolio clutched like a bid paddle. Haddon waved at the yard with a realtor's flourish. "See? Untapped revenue just rusting in the sun." We locked eyes. He smiled, a smile polished for boardrooms, not marriages. "Sean, this is Brooke. She handles commercial turnarounds. We're brainstorming." "We?" I stepped down the stairwell, grease still under my nails, and forced calm. "Your brainstorming ends at that fence." Brooke's gaze skimmed the piles. "Charming potential? Of course, we'd level most of it, start fresh." Haddon nodded, launching numbers he must have pulled off a podcast, square foot projections, salvage credits he'd never filed. He gestured toward an empty slot where my sold engine block had sat. "That piece alone," he bragged, "will cover first phase cleanup." Enough. I walked to my pickup, opened the glove box, and withdrew a manila folder containing the certified deed, the will, and yesterday's electronic transfer slips. I offered them to Brooke. "In case your due diligence missed this, the property isn't for sale, and you're trespassing." Brooke scanned the header, her confident posture wilting. Haddon's brows pinched. He chuckled, low and brittle. "You plan to build an empire from rust? Don't embarrass yourself, Shan." He leaned closer, breath edged with spearmint. "This marriage was charity. You were always the weak link." I didn't flinch until their tires sprayed stones speeding away. Then adrenaline dissolved, leaving my hands shaky. Tears threatened but stalled at the cliff of my resolve. I wiped grit from my palms, walked to Bay 4, and rolled the steel door shut with deliberate force. My version of a slammed phone. Night dropped like a curtain. In the trailer, I opened a spiral notebook and started a new page. A curse can also be a crucible. Let's see what it makes of me. Under that, in red ink, open separate account. Name, rebirth, deposit seed check, order safety gear, sandblaster parts. Before bed, I double-checked every padlock, slipped the lighter into my pocket, and inhaled the scent of aged motor oil. the closest thing to a lullaby I owned. For the first time in years, no voice in my head repeated Haddon's critiques. Silence, though heavy, finally felt like mine. I found the envelope after midnight, wedged beneath a tray of wrenches I hadn't touched yet. Pale blue, curling at the corners, my name printed in the tidy block letters Granddad used for shipping labels. I carried it to the desk, flicked on the gooseneck lamp, and unfolded 3 pages that smelled faintly of motor oil. The date in the corner stunned me. Thanksgiving, 3 years back, long before his last trip to the hospital. "Squirt," it began. "I see the way they watch you when you think no one's looking. I heard Haddon tell his brother you were dead weight, something he'd write off. I'm no college man, but I know a liability when I hear one, and it isn't you." My throat tightened. The next line cut deeper. "I didn't raise you to be anyone's scapegoat, so I'm giving you the only armor I've got, 4 acres of stories in steel." Taped to the final sheet was a faded sketch. The yard at full hum in the 1990s. Welding bays marked, paint booths shaded, arrows toward a small annex labeled Art College Contract. He'd even penciled potential revenue beside each service, tiny optimistic numbers marching in neat rows. I pressed the pages flat, heart drumming. Granddad hadn't abandoned me to rust. He'd handed me a blueprint disguised as a burden. Outside, dawn licked the horizon. I brewed gas station coffee on the camping stove and studied the map until light filled the office. On a dusty file cabinet, a yellow note fluttered. "Call Miss Ellery. Still wants Studebaker door?" I dialed, expecting voicemail. A clear voice picked up on the second ring. "Is this Glenn's granddaughter?" "Yes, ma'am. He always said you were sharper than you let on. Still have that driver's side door?" "It's leaning against a 57 chassis." "Name your price." I did, hesitant, but fair. She chuckled. "Add 50 for Glenn's story about outrunning a thunderstorm in that car." By noon, $4,000 pinged into the Rebirth account. I logged it, cheeks warm with something close to pride. Momentum felt contagious. I yanked weeds from the chain link, dragged out a plywood board, and painted in bold red letters, "Glenn's Last Stand, Restoration in Progress." The brush strokes wobbled, but the promise felt steady. I snapped photos, launched a bare-bones website, and began a blog titled "The Curse They Laughed At." First post, the Studebaker sale, a picture of the door, and Granddad's quote about rust and stories. Comments trickled in, mostly strangers rooting for a comeback. One wrote, "My uncle worked for Lewis in '88. He'd be thrilled you're bringing it back." The encouragement settled under my ribs like decent heat. Midweek, Myron returned with 2 ex-employees' phone numbers and a cooler of hand pies his wife baked. While he walked the aisles, I mentioned my plan to host an antique car meetup in 3 months. He nodded, tapping a coil spring with his boot. "Glenn bet on vision, not volume. Keep that line straight." Friday afternoon, I drove the Studebaker door to a freight depot outside Clarksville. On the way back, a familiar Chevy Tahoe idled beside a vacant storefront. Haddon's. Engine off, windows up, just enough tint to hide his expression. I slowed but didn't stop. At the yard, I slid the gate shut, looped the chain twice, and wrote on the whiteboard above my desk, "Watch the watchers." Night dropped heavy. Cicadas buzzed in the poplars as I locked the office and ran an extension cord to charge my phone. Before turning in, I tacked Granddad's letter beside the blueprint, reminder and compass in one. Somewhere around 2 a.m., a metallic clink echoed near the rear fence. Jasper, the neighborhood mutt who'd adopted me, lifted his head and growled. I killed the lamp. Another clink, this time sharper, followed by the screech of a crowbar meeting padlock. Whoever it was hadn't noticed the sensor lights I rewired that morning. I eased the shotgun-length flashlight from my nightstand, breath steady despite the adrenaline surge. The beam clicked on, sweeping across tire stacks until it landed on a shadow bent over the back gate. Footsteps scraped across loose screws outside Bay 4, metal meeting metal in a slow, deliberate rhythm. I kept the lamp off, wrapped both hands around the flashlight like a short bat, and listened. Another step, then the pop of a pry bar slipping between hasp and padlock. Whoever was out there didn't know about the fresh bolts I'd drilled into the gate after supper. Floorboards in the office creaked. One long moan near the supply closet. My breath stayed measured. I thumbed the switch. The beam carved through shadows and froze on a gaunt face I recognized from too many holiday photos. Cale Ramsey, Haddon's cousin, eyes wide and jittery, a smear of axle grease across his cheek. He lifted empty palms. "Whoa, hey, Shan, I thought I left a torque wrench here last year." I didn't waste syllables. Thumb pressed redial from earlier calls. Speaker rang straight to 911. I stated the address, name, and attempted burglary, as if reciting a grocery list. Flashlight never wavering from Cale's pupils. Panic slammed into him harder than any wrench. He bolted, shoulders knocking over a shelf of spark plug boxes, then vanished into the yard's dark ribs. Sirens rose in the distance, blue strobes arriving just fast enough for a report, but not an arrest. Deputies surveyed the damage. Pried latch on the rear gate, a kicked drywall panel near my late granddad's safe, one floor tile loosened like a lifted secret. Nothing stolen, yet something hunted. Morning dragged its first heat when Myron rumbled in, coffee in one hand, crowbar in the other. After listening, he muttered, "They weren't after tools, they wanted paper. Title packet maybe, even Glenn's backup will." Safe open, we found the usual ledgers and a tarnished fountain pen. Myron tapped the rear wall. Hollow. A screwdriver popped a concealed panel, releasing an envelope thick with dust and warning. Not for Haddon, ever. Inside lay a fresh will, witnessed and notarized 6 weeks before Granddad's stroke. I skimmed the dense text. Full ownership of Lewis and Sons to me, plus an adjacent half-acre that county maps listed as undeveloped. My pulse hammered. That strip happened to border the proposed bypass Haddon bragged about last year. I stepped outside, document fluttering in the July breeze, and pictured my husband dismissing the yard as dead weight. The word curse echoed, then twisted into collateral. A laugh, sharp and unfamiliar, slipped out. This land wasn't an anchor, it was leverage. Back near the welding shed, I dragged out a rusted welcome sign tourists once photographed for its kitsch value. Red spray paint from an old toolbox covered the letters until only 3 words remained. Not yours anymore. With a ladder Myron steadied, I bolted it above the main gate. The image felt right, so I snapped a phone pic, posted it with the caption, "Inheritance reclaimed." By sunset, the pictures circled local groups. Women I'd never met cheered in comments, sharing stories of pawned heirlooms and one-sided divorces. Exhaustion found me after dark, but satisfaction kept my spine straight. Sirens no longer lingered in my ears. Instead, I heard the hum of possibility. I locked every bay, set the motion sensors, and fed Jasper a leftover hand pie before shutting the trailer door. Saturday, clouds stacked like anvils over the ridge, I headed into town for brake pads and plywood, list in hand. Traffic slowed near the farmer's market, and that's when a scene punched the air from my lungs. Haddon on the sidewalk beside his Tahoe, gesturing animatedly. Beside him, arm tucked through his, stood my mother, Nancy. She laughed at something he'd said, the same tilt-back laugh she once saved for choir picnics. My grip tightened around the steering wheel until plastic protested. They didn't see me. Or maybe they did and didn't care. Either way, betrayal's burn spread from throat to fingertips. I drove past without honking, engine growling a little louder than necessary. I didn't move. Not at first. I just stood there in the shadows of the back lot, watching my mother laugh with the man who tried to erase me, tried, and nearly succeeded. She stepped out of a silver Lexus like she owned the place. Not Glenn's truck, not her old clunker. This car had dealership gloss still fresh on the finish, and there she was, dressed in that lavender coat she only pulled out for garden club luncheons, grinning like a teenager, blueprints clutched in her hand. Haddon leaned in, pointing at something on the page, and she laughed again, loud and clear like wind chimes. They looked like partners, co-conspirators. I stayed out of sight behind the old oil barrels until they were done talking. I waited until the Lexus rolled out and the dust settled before walking back to the office and locking the door. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't touch and stared at nothing until dawn started creeping through the window. By noon, I'd made up my mind. Friday was her diner day. Same corner booth, same waitress, Cheryl, who always brought her a cup of weak coffee and a small fruit plate without asking. I parked 2 blocks away and walked in quiet. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, but Nancy didn't look up. She was too busy tapping on her phone. I slid into the seat across from her. Her eyes lifted, cool and steady, like she'd expected me. "I saw you," I said. I kept my voice low. "Yesterday, with Haddon, the blueprints." She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just folded her hands on the table. "Then I guess there's no point denying it." I waited. "He's practical," she said after a sip of her coffee. "You never were. You cling to that place like it's sacred." "It was Dad's, and Grandpa's, and I've kept it going." "And what has it gotten you?" she interrupted. "Broken fingers? Grease-stained boots? You were always better at feeling than building. Haddon builds." I leaned in. "So what? You funded him behind my back? Let him bulldoze everything we stood for?" She set her mug down with a soft clink. "You wouldn't understand. There's a zoning proposal going through next year, industrial corridor. Developers want that land. They offered good money, quietly, through Haddon's company." "And you helped hide it?" My throat tightened. "From your own daughter?" Nancy tilted her head like I was a difficult child again. "You were never meant to keep it, Shannon. You were supposed to fail, quietly. Then we'd reclaim it with grace. You've made it messy." That word landed like a slap. "So you never believed in me," I said, voice barely above a whisper. She didn't even hesitate. "I believed in what was best for the family, and that was never you." I pushed away from the booth and stood. Cheryl called after me, but I didn't look back. The door smacked shut behind me, and the cold hit harder than expected. I didn't cry. Not then. Back home, I stripped off the jacket that still smelled faintly of motor oil and checked my phone. 1 voicemail. Unknown number. I hit play. "Hi, this is Gary Lennox, Glenn's old attorney. I found something I think you need to see on the USB inside the safe. There's a video. It's time-stamped and everything. Glenn, well, you'll see." I ran back to the yard office, unlocked the safe again, and pulled out the USB, plugged it into my laptop with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The screen flickered. There was Glenn, seated in his armchair, oxygen tube trailing across his chest, but his eyes were sharp, his voice steady. "If you're watching this," he said, "it means I'm gone, and it means someone's trying to take what don't belong to them. Haddon never cared for this place. He wanted it gone, fast and for cash. But Shannon, she saw it. She saw the soul of it, the way her grandmother did. That's why I changed the will." He paused. "She's the one. Always was." I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to breathe. The next morning, I laid out every document I had, blueprints, development plans, Glenn's revised will, and now this video. I wasn't going to let them bulldoze it. Not for condos, not for warehouses. I started sketching out something new, a plan Glenn would have approved of, something that honored the yard's history, its soul, a repair school for women, a small community shop, a garden space with repurposed metal art. If they wanted to erase me, they'd have to go through the very thing they thought was worthless. That afternoon, I hauled out the chalkboard from the old parts trailer and wrote 2 words across it. "Coming soon." I posted a photo of it online with the caption, "He called it a curse. I call it home." By evening, it had hundreds of comments, most of them from women, most of them saying the same thing, "We see you. Don't stop." I sat back, phone in hand, exhausted but steady. I was ready to take the next step, but when I stepped outside, my heart dropped. Both front tires were slashed, and on the windshield, a note in all caps. "This isn't over." The wind was picking up as I stepped closer to my truck. Gravel crunched under my boots, but that wasn't what made my stomach twist. It was the note, crude block letters scrawled in black marker, flapping against the windshield under one ruined wiper. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." I didn't move for a moment, just stared. My front tire was shredded to ribbons, deep gouges ripped through the sidewall like claws had torn into it. Whoever did this wanted it to be loud, obvious, but still untraceable. No name, no initials, just a warning, a threat, and a message: back off. Jasper stood behind me, fur on edge, his growl low and uneasy. He circled the truck once, sniffed at the front fender, then sat down with his ears pinned back, like he didn't like the smell of the air itself. And truth be told, neither did I. I scanned the yard. The sky was turning pink along the edges, but the shadows stretched long and thin between the rusted cars. No movement, no people. I hadn't installed cameras yet, something Glenn had been meaning to help me with before everything changed. Was someone watching now? I stuffed the note into my jacket pocket and stepped back. My hands were shaking, though I tried to pretend otherwise. Half an hour later, I stood at the sheriff's desk, holding the note between two fingers. Sheriff Devlin barely glanced up from his coffee. "Huh. Tires slashed and a nasty message. That it?" "That's it," I said slowly. "I'm reporting it because it's not just a prank. I want it on record." He leaned back in his creaky chair, eyes dull behind his glasses. Could have been some bored kids. Halloween's not far off. Maybe they thought it'd be funny. "It's not kids," I said, heat rising in my chest. "It's not random. You know it, and I know it." Devlin raised a brow. "You accusing someone?" "No. But you also know who's got reasons." He took a long sip from his mug, then set it down slow. "Without proof, I can't do much, Shannon. Don't go stirring up trouble that ain't confirmed." I stared at him for a long beat, then walked out without another word. Outside, the breeze was sharper now. The leaves scattered across the pavement like whispers I couldn't catch. Back at the trailer, I kept my porch light on and double-checked the lock before I sat down on the worn recliner inside. Jasper curled at my feet, tense but quiet. I should have been tired, but my brain refused to rest. And that's when I remembered. It was one night, months ago, when Glenn was still strong enough to tinker. We were sitting on the porch, watching lightning bugs flicker over the yard, and he'd said something odd. "If anything ever happens, check the birdhouse." At the time, I thought he was being poetic. Now I wasn't so sure. I grabbed my flashlight, threw on a sweater, and stepped out into the yard. The air smelled like rust and pine sap, and the only sound was Jasper's paws padding behind me. The birdhouse was a little red thing Glenn had nailed to the post near the old tool shed. I pulled up a chair and reached inside. My fingers brushed wood, then something metal, a false bottom. I carefully pulled it free. Inside was a small plastic case, the kind used for portable drives. Next to it, a tiny receiver box and a label: motion sensor, front yard, loop. Back inside, I booted up my laptop, fingers trembling. It took a minute for the drive to load, but when it did, folders appeared. Months of motion-triggered recordings. I clicked into one from 2 nights ago. The screen flickered. Then there it was, Haddon's truck, headlights off. He climbed out, paced. A second man emerged from the passenger side, tall, hood up, face obscured. They stood under the edge of the carport, half-shadowed, but close enough to make out bits and pieces. I turned the volume all the way up. The audio was faint, but I caught enough. "If she won't leave willingly, we'll make her." My jaw tightened. The timestamp was gold. The faces, at least Haddon's, were clear. I copied the clip and attached it to an email. To Glenn's lawyer, Doug Patterson. Subject: urgent. Evidence from Glenn's camera. Message: found this on the drive Glenn hid in the birdhouse. Time-stamped. Watch closely. I need to know what this can do legally. I didn't expect an answer until morning, but 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with a reply. Doug Patterson. Hold on to this. Do not delete it. If anything else happens, I'll move this higher up. You're not alone in this. It wasn't a warm hug or a security detail, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't screaming into the void. I closed the laptop, exhaled, and stood at the window. Outside, the junkyard lay quiet under the moonlight, rusted hoods catching silver reflections, tires stacked like forgotten monuments, and Glenn's old sign swaying slightly in the breeze. They wanted me scared, wanted me to pack up and vanish, but I was done shrinking. They picked the wrong woman. I walked out to the center of the lot and just stood there, hands in my pockets, breathing in the air of the place that used to smell like motor oil and hard work. I could almost hear Glenn's voice again. "You see what others don't. That's your edge, Shan." I wasn't going to let them win. Not by intimidation, not by backdoor deals, not by rewriting my worth in secret meetings and slashed tires. They wanted me to stop digging, but they just handed me the shovel, and I knew exactly where to strike next. The next morning, sunlight bounced off brick storefronts as I crossed Main Street toward the town offices, thumb brushing the flash drive in my back pocket. Every step felt measured, part dread, part purpose, until I pushed through the double doors and entered the council chamber. Folding chairs were already half filled, retirees clutching coffee, local reporters, and the regular crowd who came for zoning squabbles and gossip. Conversation dimmed the moment I stepped on the carpet runner. I cleared my throat and said one name, steady and loud enough for the microphone to catch. Haddon Gale. Heads swiveled. On the dais, Haddon sat in his councilman seat beside Nancy, who wore her Sunday pearls even though it was Tuesday. Their smiles tightened. I approached the lectern. "Madam Mayor, members of the council, I believe you should be aware of a security breach involving Councilman Gale." Whispers rippled. The mayor, a silver-haired woman named Ruth Talley, who once played dominoes with Glenn, tilted her head. "State your evidence, Ms. Ridgway." I plugged the flash drive into the projector. Grainy nighttime footage flickered onto the pull-down screen. Haddon's truck, the hooded accomplice, the exchange of cash beneath my carport. The room held its breath. Audio crackled, muffled words, but "get her out" rang clear enough. "You wanted me gone," I said, turning back to the dais. "This proves it wasn't a zoning matter. It was intimidation." Haddon lurched to his feet, face blotched. "This is doctored. She's desperate and vindictive." "Sit down, councilman," Mayor Talley said, voice like gravel. But Haddon slapped the table. "You all know her. Always crying victim." A younger council member at the far end, Diego Alvarez, an Army vet who ran the local computer shop, raised a hand. "Madam Mayor, I can authenticate that file. Hash values, metadata, the works. 5 minutes." "Granted," the mayor replied. Haddon sputtered. Nancy touched his sleeve, murmuring something that made his jaw clench harder. While Diego worked, I scanned the audience. Myron stood near the back, arms crossed, offering a nod that steadied me. Sheriff Devlin avoided my gaze. Diego angled his laptop toward the mayor. "Timestamp aligns with camera firmware. No edits." He looked at Haddon. "It's genuine." A hush fell. Mayor Talley leaned forward. "Glenn Ridgway might have been a lot of things, but a liar wasn't one of them. If he trusted Ms. Ridgway, this council owes her the same courtesy. We'll open an ethics inquiry into Councilman Gale's conduct effective immediately." Gasps. Haddon half rose again, then thought better of it and sank into his chair. Nancy's pearl smile faded like old paint. Meeting adjourned, the crowd spilled into the hallway, buzz rising. I exhaled a breath I'd been holding since the footage played and headed toward the exit. A hand tapped my shoulder. "Shannon." I turned. An elderly man in a tweed jacket, eyes sharp as drill bits. Ralph Pritchard, played poker with Glenn every other Wednesday. He slipped a small envelope into my palm. "Your grandfather asked me to keep this until you needed it." "What is it?" "Another key," he said, then lowered his voice. "Second property. He bought it quietly in your name 6 months before he passed. I suspect it's why certain folks are desperate." Before I could ask more, he patted my arm and disappeared into the throng. Outside, late morning sun lit up the envelope's single-typed word, Foundry. My fingers tingled. The junkyard I thought was a dead end kept unfolding like nesting dolls, each layer revealing Glenn's faith in me. Back at the yard, I sat on the tailgate, staring at rusty silhouettes and feeling the ground settle beneath my boots. Maybe this place wasn't a curse or even just a crucible. Maybe it was a map. Not leaving. Not now. That evening, after bolting the gate and feeding Jasper, I packed a thermos of coffee, slipped the envelope and flashlight into my bag, and slid behind the wheel of Myron's spare pickup, its tires mercifully intact. The address on Pritchard's envelope led me 10 miles north of town, down a rutted lane lined with cottonwoods. Their branches scraped Myron's windshield as if warning me to turn back. But the gate ahead, drooping chain, rusted padlock, pulled me on. I cut the engine, clicked my flashlight on, and climbed out. Cold air carried the smell of wet iron. One hard twist of the lock, and it fell away. Inside the fence squatted a corrugated shed the size of a gymnasium, windows dusty, one corner sagging. I pushed the door, hinges shrieked like a hawk. Fluorescent tubes overhead flickered to life, Glenn's handiwork, wired to a motion sensor, and the sight stole my breath. Rows of pallets wrapped in plastic hugged the walls. Each bore a label in Glenn's handwriting. EcoSteel prototype, fragile. Along the back, a metal desk held an ancient desktop computer and a dusty monitor. A sticky note on the screen read, "Play me." My hands trembled as I pressed the power button. The monitor glowed blue, then faded into the grainy image of Glenn, oxygen tube in place, but eyes bright. "If you're watching this, Shan," he said, voice raspy yet steady, "I'm gone, and you're carrying the weight. Thought I'd leave you something besides debt." He gestured to the pallets. "That's a modular recycling rig, melts scrap at low heat, reforges into panels strong as new steel with half the energy. Call it EcoSteel. Took me decades." He coughed, smiled. "The patent? Filed under your name. Figured the suits would come sniffing otherwise." My knees went soft. Glenn spoke again. "The council wants this land for warehouses, but this shed, that yard, can change the way salvage works. Don't sell." He leaned closer. "You always saw the soul in what others tossed. Trust that." The video ended. For a moment, only the hum of old fluorescence filled the air. Then I opened the desk drawers, stacks of files, valuation reports from a Nashville green tech firm, each stamped in red, projected market, 4.7 Meners. Beneath them, the official patent certificate, my name in bold. I sat on a crate, fingers tracing the raised seal. All the insults, the threats, the laughter, they shrank against the enormity of Glenn's faith. By noon next day, word traveled faster than gossip. Lewis girl sitting on a gold mine. Whether Diego verified the patent or Pritchard let it slip, I didn't know, didn't matter. My phone exploded, Nancy pleading for a family meeting, Haddon promising fair talks, Eula cooing about misunderstandings. I muted them all. 3 days later, they arrived in convoy. Haddon in his Mercedes, Nancy in the Lexus, Eula riding shotgun. I met them at the gate, Jasper at my heel, Pritchard beside me holding a thick envelope. Haddon spread his arms. "Let's be reasonable. We're family." I handed Pritchard the cue. He slid the deed and patent certificate across the gate mesh. "Both recorded with the county," he said. "Full title and intellectual property belong solely to Ms. Ridgway." Haddon's smile cracked. Nancy swallowed. Eula whispered, "Shannon, sweetheart, think of legacy." I clicked the padlock shut. "This is legacy. Mine, Glenn's, not yours." Their eyes pleaded one last time. I turned away. In weeks, EcoSteel Technologies LLC signed a joint venture with a regional fabrication plant. The junkyard transformed, weeded aisles, painted bays, solar panels glinting where rust once ruled. Glenn's photo watched over the main workbench, cap tilted, grin eternal. First Profits funded the Ridgway Foundation, granting small-town girls scholarships in renewable engineering. Opening day, I cut the ribbon with Myron at my side and Diego streaming live for half the county. Reporters asked about the family feud. I spoke about recycling hope. That evening, alone among neatly stacked ingots, I whispered the words I'd saved. "We did it, Grandpa." They called this place a curse. Debt, rust, shame. But they never saw what he left behind: love, vision, and the strength to rebuild in my own name. Have you ever inherited something everyone else mocked, only to find it was the greatest gift? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.